Hello there, and thanks for joining me. I'm digital artist Aaron Rutten, and these are 10 of the worst digital art mistakes. These are in no particular order. Let's start with the first one, which is incorrect tablet use. You want your tablet to be parallel to your screen, and you want to be right in front of your tablet and right in front of your screen. If you have a sliding drawer for your keyboard, that's a good place to put your tablet, because then it'll be right in your lap, right in front of you. You don't want to be off to the side or have the tablet off to the side, and you don't want to have the tablet turned at an angle. That'll make it a lot harder to get the hand-eye coordination down, and it'll make drawing more difficult and less accurate. So just make sure that your tablet, your screen, and your eye level are all parallel to each other. The second mistake on my list happens when you don't shift the hue of your color when you're shading. So what I mean by shifting the hue is you have your hue ring here, and right now I'm on an orange hue. And if I wanted to shade this circle and make it into a sphere, or make it three-dimensional, what I would want to do is decrease and increase the value, and put a shadow on one side and a highlight on the other. However, this tends to look kind of flat. If I duplicate this layer, and I try a different method of shading, this time I'm going to shift the hue. So I have my base color here, which is this orange hue. I'm going to make it darker like I did last time, but then I'm going to shift the hue a little bit towards red. Then I'm going to put in my shadow. I'm going to sample my base color again, and then I'm going to select a highlight that is a little bit more yellow and a bit brighter, and I'll put that in. And now I get a much more natural result when I'm shading. Generally speaking, I'm shifting my highlights towards a warmer hue, and I'm shifting my shadows towards a cooler hue. Mistake number 3 on my list is not adding enough contrast or enough range of values to your artwork, which will make it appear kind of flat or kind of dull. And you can see that in this apple here. It looks really flat. So we can see that we can add quite a bit more contrast to this piece. I'm going to darken some of the side here. This is adding a little bit of contrast. Now I could of course do that with a lighter color as well. We can do a quick before and after, and we can see the effect that it had on the apple. We added a lot more contrast, which helps it look more realistic. Mistake number 4 on my list is not looking close enough at your artwork to see mistakes. These are little mistakes like accidental marks, strange edges, repetitive patterns from brushstrokes, banding from gradients or transitions in color, or even just the proportions being off somewhere. So this piece looks pretty good from a distance, but it's a pretty large piece, so I can zoom into it, and I can kind of scan around and I can look for some areas like, oh, what do we have here? Here's some weird little line. We can see it very clearly when we're looking at it 100%, but if we were painting this much smaller and we never really zoomed in on that area, we might not notice that, and then when we go to print it later, all of a sudden, we might notice that there's this weird mistake. So there's a number of ways to fix mistakes. If this were on a layer, you could simply erase it, or if it's too late and you've already flattened all your layers down, you could do something like paint over it, or just blend it. I can use the diffuse blur blender and just blend it away. Or I could just use a brush and hold Alt to sample my color near it and just paint it away, like so. Now while we're on the topic of zooming in and adding and removing detail, that brings us to mistake number 5, which is adding too much detail. You know, you could really go in here and zoom in really close, and you could add in all kinds of little cracks and crevices, or you could, you know, for instance, write a serial number on here if this is some kind of robot or something. But then when you go to print this out, or you view it from far away, suddenly all of that detail is lost. That serial number that I wrote on the robot looks more like a weird eyebrow now, and that little mark that I made on the metal texture doesn't even show up. So you want to look at things close and you want to look at things far away, but overall you want to kind of weight your judgment towards how it looks far away, because most of the time that's where people are going to be viewing it. Mistake number 6 is saving your artwork as a JPEG. If we go to File, Save, or Save As, we have lots of options for saving our file. And one of the more commonly known formats is JPEG, but that's really not the best format to use, nor is it the only format to use. In fact, it's probably one of the worst formats you can use. So why is JPEG so bad? JPEG is bad because it's going to compress your image using lossy compression. And when we go to save as a JPEG, we can see these quality options which represent the amount of compression. So if I zoom into an area of detail in my painting and we set this to fair, and we reduce the quality, you can really quickly see what's happening. You may see images on the internet that look really blocky like this, and that's because they've been overly compressed. You know, you could set this quality higher, and even if you set it to excellent and you set it to 100%, it's still going to compress your image, and compression is basically throwing away information to make the file smaller. So unless you have to save as a JPEG, do not use JPEG. If you do have to save it as a JPEG, make sure to save a copy of your artwork. Don't save your original as a JPEG. So rather than use JPEG, I'm going to go to Save As, and I'm going to choose PNG or PNG. Now if we go to Save, it doesn't really ask us anything. It's just going to save it as that PNG format. If you're using something like Photoshop, you might get a few more options. But the difference between PNG and JPEG is that PNG is a lossless compression format, meaning that it's not going to throw away any information or really harm the image in any way by saving it. And PNG is a web-compatible format in most cases. So a lot of the time, anywhere that will accept a JPEG will also accept a PNG. It's also worth mentioning that your color stays a little more accurate when you save as PNG versus JPEG. JPEG can sometimes change the color when you're saving. Mistake number 7 also relates to saving, and that is not saving often enough and not saving iterations. So I hear a lot of artists talk about how they're working on something for a half hour or an hour or longer, and then something happens like their computer crashes or maybe their software crashes, and then all of a sudden they've lost that information. And that isn't very uncommon. Sometimes things crash or things happen, so it's good to save often. I save constantly and I use the keyboard shortcut. That way it's really quick and easy. You can see I also have shortcut buttons up here. When I'm saving, I prefer to choose Save As and Save Iterations. So as I'm working, I'll have painting number 1. Then maybe later when I save again, I'll save it as painting number 2, and then painting number 3, and painting number 4. That way I have all of those older copies I can go back to, and if something bad happens when I'm working, I don't have to start over from the very beginning. I can just go back to an older version. Mistake number 8 deals with resolution. I'm going to go ahead and create a new image here, and I want this image to be 14 inches by 11 inches if I were to print it. Resolution is going to control the amount of detail in that image. A standard resolution for printing is 300. The standard for the web is 72 pixels per inch. So since I'm going to be printing this and this is going to be a piece of artwork, I want to use a higher resolution like 300. That way if I go in here and I start painting, doodling, scribbling, I have lots and lots of detail. I can zoom in really close to this, and these lines are nice and smooth. If I create a duplicate of this canvas, and I only make the resolution 72, but I still keep the dimensions the same, 14 by 11, and I use that same brush. When I zoom in now, there's going to be a lot of little jagged pixels. You can really see these here when I zoom in. That's because there isn't as much detail or as much resolution. Mistake number 9 is a very common one, and that is destructive editing. What if you have something where you don't know what size you want it to be and you need to kind of experiment and make it maybe bigger or smaller and go back and forth? What you would want to do is use something like Photoshop to turn that layer into a smart object. So I'm going to right click on that layer and choose Convert to Smart Object. And what that's going to do is that's going to lock in the original resolution. So even if I scale it down really tiny and then scale it back up again, as long as I don't go bigger than the original, it's still going to look really good. So I'm going to call that layer Smart. Let's make a duplicate of that layer. Let's call this Dumb, and we'll make this not a smart layer. So to do that, I'm just going to rasterize it, turn it back into a regular layer. Now on that Dumb layer, if you will, I'm going to scale that down really small. I'm going to commit to that change. Then I'm going to transform it and scale it up again. Now you can see what happened here. You can't even see what it is because I made it so small that it was only just a few pixels. And then when I tried to blow it up again, that information was thrown away. So the computer just had to try to guess where the detail was, and it didn't do a very good job. If you don't have smart layers in your application, you could also just right click on the layer and duplicate it, hide one of your duplicates to keep it as your original, and then you could experiment with the copy. And then that way, if you make it bigger and smaller and bigger and smaller, and it gets degraded, that's okay because that's just a copy. You can get your size and position correct, and then you can reveal your original layer, take it over there, move it, scale it down, then it'll look nice and clean. If we look at these side by side, you can see the difference that it makes. One is still nice and sharp, the other one's all blocky because we transformed it too much. So when you're throwing away information or permanently altering your image, that's called destructive editing. You want to try to use non-destructive editing, which means you're not going to throw away any information or risk messing anything up. Another example of destructive versus non-destructive editing is using the eraser. The eraser is destructive. If I erase this person's arms, and then let's say I do something like I make a few more marks with the eraser, and then I exceed the number of undos I have available. If for some reason I wanted to go back and bring the arms back and I try to use undos, I can only go back so far. So now those arms are gone and I'd be forced to have to redraw them. Now that's not so bad if you're just dealing with a stick figure, but there's a smarter way to non-destructively erase, and that is to add a mask. So I'll click on Create New Layer Mask. I'll select black, and I'm going to select the airbrush this time. And if you paint within a mask, basically what you're doing is you're concealing those pixels. So you're not really erasing them. They're going away, but they're just becoming invisible. They're not really getting removed. So I've masked away or concealed some areas of those arms. But what if I decided I wanted to bring them back? Rather than redraw them, I'll select white and I'll paint in my mask, and I can reveal or bring those areas back. So that's a non-destructive way of erasing. Another example of destructive versus non-destructive editing happens when you're creating effects. So for example, I could go ahead and go to Effects, Tonal Control, Adjust Colors, and I could shift the hue and make this planet a completely different color. However, this is a destructive edit, meaning that if I keep changing the color, it might be really difficult to get it back to its original color. Or if I apply too many color changes, it might start to kind of subtract detail from the overall color in the piece. So a better way to do this is to duplicate that layer. I'm going to select all with Control A and then copy and paste. Now I have a duplicate here, and I can apply that same effect to the duplicate. So I've changed the color, but I still have my original. Besides making it easier and less risky to experiment, you can also take advantage of things like the different blend modes if you wanted to blend things together to experiment with different effects. And finally, mistake number 10 on our list is not using layers. Believe it or not, a lot of digital artists don't use layers. And that's easy to understand because if you're used to working with traditional media, you have to start from the background and work your way forward because you can't move layers around. So if I was painting, I'd have to put in my leaves and stem first. Then I'd have to put in my petals, like so. And then I'd have to put in my center on top of that. And then if I decided that I wanted a background, I would have to very carefully go and paint around all of the edges. It might have made sense to put in my background first, I guess. But I was just doodling and I didn't know that I wanted a background, and now that I do, I have to spend a lot of time very carefully correcting mistakes. And even if I'm very careful, I'll still have to go and add in more pink here to fix my mistakes and so on. And it's a really difficult way to work because if I decided I don't want my background to be blue, I want it to be red, then I have to go and I have to select red, and I have to paint over that blue again, and I have to spend more time. Now that's just how you have to do it when you're working with traditional media, but if you're working digitally, you don't have to do it that way. You can use layers. Layers are your friend. So for example, I have my center on a layer, I have my petals on a layer, I have my stem on a layer, and I have my background on a layer. So if I wanted to go in and paint in a background, I can choose blue, and I can paint behind those layers. And if I don't want that layer to be blue, I want it to be green, I can select green and I can quickly fill that layer with green. Or I could fill it with red if I want it to be red, and I can quickly change it. If I decide I don't want a background, I can either hide that layer or I can delete that layer. It also helps me to move things around. If I want to reposition my whole flower here, I can reposition it. If I want to transform the petals and make them bigger, I can transform the petals. If I want to change the color of the stem, I can change the color of the stem. So layers are your friend. You want to make sure that you always use layers, and use as many layers as you need to. So there you go, those are 10 of the worst digital art mistakes. If you found this information helpful, take a quick second to like this video.
And if you're new to my channel, I'd love to have you subscribe. I have a lot more digital art tutorials for artists like you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.